Welcome back to Eureka. Have you ever read something, maybe an article or even a work email, and just moments later, poof, it's gone? Like the words were there, but the meaning didn't quite land.
Oh, absolutely. It's a really common feeling. We see the words, but actually understanding and remembering them, that's a whole different ballgame.
It really is, and that's exactly what we're getting into today. We're doing a deep dive into a book called Strategies That Work, teaching comprehension for understanding, engagement, and building knowledge.
Right, by Stephanie Harvey and Goudvis. It's been a cornerstone in education for a while now, first published back in 2000, but constantly updated.
And the thing is, while it sounds like it's just for teachers, the ideas in it are actually super relevant for, well, anyone who reads anything.
Exactly. The core principles are universal. If you want to learn more effectively from articles, reports, websites, whatever you encounter day to day, these strategies can really help. It's about boosting your comprehension.
Totally. And for this deep dive, we've pulled together some interesting stuff. We got bits from the book itself, the core ideas. We also listened to some talks and podcasts featuring the authors, Harvey and Goudvis, to hear it straight from them.
Which is always great, hearing their perspective.
And maybe the most useful part, we looked at stories from actual teachers, kindergarten, elementary, middle school, who are using these strategies in their classrooms. Real-world stuff.
Yeah, that mix is key. You get the theory, the author's intent, and then you see how it actually plays out with learners of different ages. It gives a really rounded picture.
So our mission today for you listening is to pull out the practical nuggets from all this. We want to give you some tools, some ways of thinking to help you become a more, engaged and thoughtful reader.
Leading to that deeper understanding and actually remembering what you read. That's the goal.
Okay, so let's start with the big idea. The book really hammers home that reading isn't passive. It's not just decoding.
Precisely. They frame reading fundamentally as a thinking process. It's active construction of meaning, not just soaking up words.
And what does that active thinking involve?
Well, there are a few core pillars. A big one is connecting new stuff to what you already know, your background knowledge, or schema, as they call it.
Right, schema.
Then there's questioning the text, like really interrogating it, not just taking it at face value.
Okay.
And finally, synthesizing. Pulling different ideas together, maybe from different parts of the text, or mixing it with your own knowledge to form a bigger picture.
That connecting piece makes intuitive sense. If you link something new to something familiar, it's more likely to stick, isn't it?
Exactly. It gives the new information an anchor point in your brain. It's not just floating around, isolated. It becomes part of a network.
Now, the book talks about explicit strategy instruction. Sounds a bit teachery. What's the takeaway for someone just trying to read better on their own?
Yeah, let's unpack that. Explicit just means teaching these thinking tools directly. The idea is we can't just assume people, whether they're kids or adults, will naturally figure out how to, say, infer effectively.
Yeah.
So teachers model these strategies they think aloud, showing how they make sense of a text. And they provide practice. For an independent learner, this means consciously choosing to use a strategy and maybe even thinking aloud in your own head. It's about being intentional.
So instead of just hoping comprehension happens, you actively use a tool.
Exactly. You equip yourself with a mental toolkit.
Okay, so let's talk about some of these specific tools, these strategies. We mentioned activating background knowledge or schema. How does that look in practice?
Well, we found this great example from a 7th grade teacher on a blog called The Teaching Distillery. They explicitly teach students that schema is everything you already know. And they emphasize that good readers deliberately connect new information to that existing knowledge. That connection is what makes the learning stick, as they put it.
I like that, making it stick. It's about finding that hook.
It really is. Just consciously pausing and thinking, what does this remind me of? Or how does this fit with what I already know? Can make a huge difference in retention.
Okay, what about questioning? Asking questions seems obvious, but there's more to it.
Definitely. It's not just any questions. It's about asking questions before you even start reading to set a purpose. Asking questions during reading to clarify things or check your understanding. And asking questions after reading to reflect and explore deeper meanings.
So it's a continuous process.
Exactly. We saw an example with a 4th grade teacher in training, Amber. She worked with nonfiction texts and constantly paused to ask her students probing questions, things that made them stop and think critically about the information, not just passively accept it.
Like, what's the evidence for this? Or is there another perspective?
Precisely those kinds of questions. It makes you an active participant in the conversation with the text.
Which naturally makes you more invested, right? Okay, next up, visualizing. creating mental images. Easy for stories, maybe, but how does it help with, say, a technical report?
That's a good point. We often link it to fiction, but it's incredibly useful for nonfiction, too. Think about descriptions of places, historical events, or even complex processes. That seventh grade teacher we mentioned again, they were really struck by how many students struggled with this, saying they just couldn't see what they read.
Wow.
So they really emphasize using all your senses to build that mental movie. They argue it leads to a much deeper, more grounded understanding, whether it's a narrative or an explanation. Picturing it makes it less abstract.
Okay, I could see that. Picturing how photosynthesis works, for example, would probably help me understand it better than just reading the words.
Exactly. Now, how about inferring? Reading between the lines. That sounds a bit more sophisticated.
Yeah, like a detective skill for reading.
It sort of is. It's about understanding what's implied but not directly stated. Drawing conclusions based on clues in the text and your own background knowledge.
Okay.
We found this really lovely story from Kathy King-Dickman, a third grade teacher. She had a very quiet student who wasn't participating much, but when they started working on inferring, using sticky notes to jot down their inferences while reading George's Marvelous Medicine, this student just lit up. They started writing furiously on the notes.
Wow.
And that act of making their thinking visible, tracking their inferences, gave them the confidence to finally share their ideas in class. It was empowering.
That's fantastic. And it brings up that idea of leaving tracks of your thinking, which sounds really powerful. We should definitely circle back to that.
Agreed. Next strategy, determining importance, figuring out what really matters in a text.
Oh boy. Guilty as charged. I've definitely been known to highlight almost everything, thinking it's all important.
You and many others. It's a common challenge. Amber, the fourth grade teacher, tackled this directly. She guided her students reading nonfiction to highlight only info related to the main idea, the problem, and the solution. Very focused.
Look at the concrete approach.
And the seventh grade teacher also noted this tendency to over-highlight. They teach students explicitly that highlighting everything isn't helpful. The skill is identifying the key information and seeing how it connects. It's about quality, not quantity, of highlighting.
That makes sense. Less is more, if it's the right list.
Ah.
Okay, last one on the main list, synthesizing.
Right. Synthesizing is about weaving together the new information you're getting from the text with what you already know, but also with other ideas within the text. It's about creating a cohesive, evolving understanding.
Evolving?
Yeah, because your understanding might shift as you read further. The seventh grade teacher described it as a flexible, reflective skill. You piece things together, but you're open to revising your understanding as new information comes in. It's like building a mental model that gets refined as you go.
So it's the big picture, but a big picture that can change.
Exactly. It's the culmination of the other strategies in many ways.
These strategies all sound really practical. Now, the sources talked about how teachers teach these things, like modeling and guided practice. How can we adapt those ideas for our own reading?
That's a great question. Take modeling or think-alouds. That's where a teacher reads and literally says their thought process out loud. Okay, this word is confusing me. I wonder if the context clues.
Right.
We can do a version of that internally. When you hit a tough spot, consciously pause and articulate your thinking to yourself. Okay, what strategy could I use here? Am I connecting this? Should I visualize? It makes your own process clearer.
Like being your own reading coach.
Sort of, yeah. And guided practice in class, that's practicing with teacher support. For us, it means consciously picking a strategy, say, questioning and deliberately applying it to whatever we're reading, trying it out on different kinds of texts and seeing how it feels, what works, active experimentation.
And what about the collaborative stuff, like turn and talk? We saw that mentioned for kindergarten and fourth grade if I'm reading alone.
Still relevant. Even if you read solo, the act of discussing what you've read later with anyone, a friend, partner, colleague, is incredibly powerful.
How so?
It forces you to organize your thoughts, articulate your understanding, and you often get new perspectives or realize things you missed. Remember the kindergarten teacher called it a game changer?
Yeah.
And the fourth grade teacher used it too. It underlines that processing information often has a social component. Even if the initial reading is solitary, talking solidifies things.
Huh. Never really thought about it that way, but it makes sense. Just explaining it to someone else forces you to clarify it in your own mind.
Exactly. And the idea of using strategies across the curriculum, for us that just means remembering these aren't just for books or difficult articles.
Right.
Use them when reading instructions, news websites, work documents, anything. They're versatile thinking tools for any text.
Okay, so be mindful, be versatile.
Yeah.
Now, assessment and reflection. Teachers check if students are getting it. How do we check ourselves?
Good point. Teachers use things like reading journals, checking annotations, listening to discussions. We can borrow from that. Take notes as you read, even simple ones. Highlight strategically, as we discussed. Maybe pause after a section and try to summarize it in your own words, even just mentally. The key is reflection, becoming metacognitive about your reading.
Metacognitive.
Aware of your own thinking. Asking yourself, am I actually understanding this? Why or why not? What strategy did I just use? Did it help? That self-awareness is crucial for improvement.
Being intentional about the process of reading, not just the outcome.
Precisely. And some of the advice we saw for new teachers felt really applicable here, too.
Like what?
Like, start small. Don't try to juggle all 6 strategies tomorrow. Pick one, maybe questioning, and consciously practice just that for a while until it feels more natural.
Okay, that feels less daunting.
And practice on different types of texts, as a news article, a blog post, maybe instructions for something. See how the strategy adapts, and just foster that sense of active engagement, that curiosity. Don't just be a passive recipient.
Right. Be patient, experiment. Now, let's definitely circle back to that 3rd grader in the sticky notes, the tracks of thinking. That story was really striking.
It really was. This quiet child finding a voice by literally writing down their inferences, their tracks on sticky notes. It shows how making your thinking visible, even just to yourself, can deepen understanding.
It externalizes the internal process.
Exactly. And it gave that student the confidence to share. For our own reading, even if we don't use sticky notes, the principle holds. Annotating in the margins, highlighting key connections, taking brief notes, these actions make us engage more deeply. It's like having a tangible conversation with the text.
I like that conversation with the text. And we saw how putting multiple strategies together worked in that 4th grade active literacy lesson for nonfiction.
Yes, that was a great example. The teacher combined think alouds, getting students to annotate the text, having them discuss it, and then synthesizing the information.
All focused on one article.
Right. And that active, multi-pronged approach led to much better understanding and retention than if they'd just read it passively. It shows that layering these strategies, especially for complex information, can be really effective.
And this isn't just kid stuff, right? The 7th grade teacher's experience showed these are vital for older students, too.
Absolutely. That teacher uses strategies that work specifically to build foundational skills for middle schoolers who might have gaps in their comprehension.
So they explicitly teach activating schema, questioning, visualizing.
Determining importance, inferring, and synthesizing. All those core strategies we discussed, they see them as crucial building blocks regardless of age. If you want to improve your reading, these are the levers. It's never too late to strengthen these skills.
That's really encouraging, and it seems the impact goes beyond individual students. We saw a review from a 6th grade teacher.
Right, praising the book's practicality and how it helps reach diverse learners. They mention concepts like the comprehension continuum.
Which is just the idea that comprehension develops over time. It's a spectrum.
Yeah, exactly. And the inferring umbrella, suggesting there are different kinds of inferences, from simple to complex. Little frameworks that help teachers and us think about these skills.
And the broader impact. It sounded like some schools really adopted this system-wide.
Yes, there were mentions of whole schools or grade levels using this common language, talking about connections and tracks of thinking. It apparently created a more literate school culture, improved reading scores, and even got parents noticing how kids talked about books differently.
So a real culture shift around what it means to read.
Definitely. Strategies that work seems to have genuinely shifted the focus in many places from just decoding to actively teaching thinking during reading.
Okay, so wrapping this up, the big takeaway seems clear. Reading isn't passive. It's an active, strategic thinking game.
Absolutely. And by consciously using these comprehension strategies, we've talked about activating schema, questioning, visualizing, inferring, finding importance, synthesizing, anyone can become a more engaged, effective reader.
It doesn't matter your age or what you're reading. These are tools for understanding, period.
They really are tools for lifelong learning, for making sense of the flood of information we all face.
So for everyone listening, maybe the challenge this week is to pick just one strategy. Try consciously using it as you read.
Yeah, maybe focus on asking questions before, during, and after reading an article. Or try to visualize a process described in something you read for work.
And just notice. Notice how it feels. Does it change your focus, your recall?
Remember the advice. Start small, try different texts, really engage, and maybe reflect for a minute afterward. Did it help? Why? You could even try telling someone about what you read and see if that helps it click.
Right. So now that you have these insights, this peek behind the curtain of how skilled readers operate, what kind of tracks will you start leaving on your own reading journey? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive here at Eureka.